How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 2.
My fellow Americans, greetings. It's Eric Erickson from rural Louisiana. I hope you're doing well. Here this week visiting my parents. The phone number, 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, I'm happy to have you as long as you're relevant and on topic. Now, I really, genuinely, I want to put in a plug for the show notes today because I took the time to do them as thoroughly as I could in the time allowed. So normally what I do is I outline the show. People think I have like a script or teleprompter or something. No, I flag the articles I want to talk about in a shared note that Charlie and Philip can see, and then Philip takes all those links and then compiles them into the show notes. When he's on vacation, I do it myself, and I'm impressed with the work I did. I used to do it for a living when I was at Red State, and getting back in the habit now, there are a lot of things in there, and also because I'm doing them, it really is tracking. I mean, I have the show notes pulled up so that I can cover and cover the topics that I wanted to cover. And if you subscribe, you can get a kind of the flow of the show, and also all of the links to all the stuff I'm talking about in the show. That literally, you can read the stuff yourself and come to your own conclusions. So if you text DATA to 33777, the very first link, you can subscribe to the show notes. You even get a discount on the paid version of it, like a 15% discount. But the second link is my book. I will soon be going into studio. Oh, by the way, Charlie, this reminds me, I'll be going into studio sometime in the next couple of weeks, working around the show, mornings and afternoons, to record the audio version of the book. However, the publisher has said I should push you to buy the printed version of my book. You will be made to care. We'll be doing book signings with the audience, things like that. If you text DATA to 33777, you can get the book. Now, I mentioned this story yesterday. I'm going to say something that's going to make some of you mad. And I know it's going to make, because I know the temperament of some of you. And I hope that before you yell and fire off an angry email to your local program director and demand that they fire me, that you'll listen to everything I have to say in the next 10, 15 minutes. Because, as I mentioned yesterday, Joe Biden is at record unpopularity. There has not been a president running for re-election at this level of unpopularity in at least 5 decades, maybe more. He's at 37% popularity in the 538 average. The 538 average is significant because it's the one that the media and the Democrats like. They don't like Real Clear Politics because Real Clear Politics is a right-leaning website. And in addition to it being a right-leaning website, Real Clear Politics adds all the pollsters. They add the Democratic pollsters. They add the Republican pollsters. And, you know, the irony here is that Joe Biden's actually a little more popular in the Real Clear Politics polling average because they add in all the partisan polling as well. When you strip out the partisan polls for just the major media polls and the credible pollsters, he's at 37% popularity in the 538 polling average, and that's really bad. But there are two ways to look at this. The way the Republicans will look at this is Donald Trump is a shoo-in for election given how unpopular Joe Biden is. The more people show up to vote, the better off it is for Donald Trump, and the Democrats are in for a brutal beatdown. This is now where I make some of you mad and say this is the way the Democrats are looking at this. Joe Biden is the most historically unpopular president to run for re-election since World War II. That includes Jimmy Carter and Lyndon Johnson, including when Lyndon Johnson stepped aside. And yet he's tied with Donald Trump because the Republicans decided to nominate a historically unpopular and flawed man. So Joe Biden, who should be getting his butt kicked, has a very good shot at winning the race. That's how the Democrats view it. The way I view it, my honest, candid opinion, beyond just the objective analysis of how the two campaigns view this, my honest view of this is Democrats, you're running against a man who's a 34-count convicted felon, and the best you can do is a tied race. That's a problem. The Atlantic has a piece out. Here's the headline. The economy reaches superstar status. If the United States economy were an athlete right now, it would be peak LeBron James. If it were a pop star, it would be peak Taylor Swift. 4 years ago, the pandemic temporarily brought much of the world economy to a halt. Since then, America's economic performance has left other countries in the dust and even broken some of its own records. The growth rate is high, the unemployment rate is at historic lows, household wealth is surging, and wages are rising faster than costs, especially for the working class. There are many ways to define a good economy. America is in tremendous shape, according to just about any of them. The American public doesn't feel that way, a dynamic that many people have recently tried to explain. But if instead of asking how people feel about the economy, we ask how it's objectively performing, we get a very different answer. If that performance, and by the way, it's true, our economy is actually doing better than others, and for the first time in a while now, wages are growing faster than the inflation rate. So people actually lost a lot of income in net income because of the price of groceries, and now we've rebounded just above the point of break even. So now your wages are actually rising more than inflation. If this trend keeps up, we're actually seeing in Gallup, and we're seeing in other polling, that people's views of the economy, though still very bad, are actually improving. Joe Biden is tied with Donald Trump despite Trump's convicted status. The Democrats should be worried about that, but the Democrats' theory of the race is that as the economy continues to improve, Joe Biden's numbers will improve, and people just simply hate Donald Trump, and this conviction will set in, and people's minds will be changed, and they will vote for Joe Biden. But some of you out there in America, I can hear you chanting this. I can hear it in the force. You're muttering two words repeatedly. Electoral college. Electoral college. Joe Biden and Donald Trump may be tied nationally within the margin of error. But what about the swing states? Nevada is a state where Republicans tend not to do well. On paper, it looks like they're doing well. But what I've learned over time is that Republicans really need to be about 5 points ahead in Nevada to really be making a meaningful difference. When you look at, for example, the 2022 Senate and gubernatorial race in Nevada, the Republican Senate candidate was running about 3 points ahead of the Democrats and lost. The Republican gubernatorial candidate was running about 5 points ahead, and he won. Those sorts of things matter. Now, when you get into the battlegrounds, Donald Trump in the Real Clear Politics polling average is over 5 points ahead of Joe Biden in Nevada. He's ahead of Joe Biden in North Carolina. He's ahead of Joe Biden outside the margin of error in Pennsylvania. He's ahead of Joe Biden outside the margin of error in Georgia and Arizona. If that trend holds, he wins. And Donald Trump has just done something in Nevada. It did not. I'm actually kind of surprised it didn't get the headlines. To the extent it got headlines, the media screaming, oh, he's going to hurt the national debt. It's going to hurt the national debt. All of a sudden, because Donald Trump could take advantage of something, suddenly the national debt matters. Is that not? I find it always hilarious that the media never cares about the national debt when it comes to Democratic spending priorities, but the moment a Republican suggests cutting taxes, oh my God, the national debt. Donald Trump in Nevada has said he will eliminate tip income. The former president said he'd eliminate tips on tipped income if he wins his second White House term, an effort to appeal to voters in the battleground state of Nevada, where he had his first rally Sunday since his conviction. Quote, hotel workers and people that get tips, you're going to be very happy because when I get in office, you're not going to get charged taxes on your tips. We're going to do that the right way, first thing in office. More than 1 in 4 private sector workers in Nevada are employed in the tip-heavy hospitality industry. The Trump campaign later acknowledged that any policy eliminating taxes on tipped earnings would require congressional approval, but eliminating taxes on tips is not currently under consideration. My House Republicans, well, because they didn't know he was going to propose it, but you can be sure they're going to do it now, and in fact, it's playing very well. Here's CBS News.
I did talk with some hotel workers yesterday, some service workers here in Las Vegas, about how that is playing with them, and Anne-Marie, about 6 people told me that would change their vote. That is enough to make them switch from voting Democrat to Republican if Donald Trump is promising something like that to them.
Oh, and he's promising, all right, and it's not bad. So here's the thing you got to understand about tips. One, it has gotten annoying. We all know the memes now where you get a colonoscopy, they turn you around the digital form and they ask for your tip. Not that tip, the other tip, the monetary tip. They do this now repeatedly. I was at a coffee shop this morning and everybody wants a tip for everything. And you know, I tend to tip. I don't tip at like a fast food restaurant, but coffee shop, yeah, I'm going to tip. People make jokes about the barista wanting the tip. I tip the barista. I tend to be a pretty generous tipper. If there's an option to tip, I tend to do it unless it's ridiculous. Like I'm not going to tip my lawyer for writing my will. I'm not going to tip my doctor for the colonoscopy. But if you're in the service industry, if you're working behind a counter and you're preparing my food, I tend to be, yeah, okay, I'll give you a tip. You're working a low-wage job and you're on your feet all day? Yes. And waiters and waitresses in particular tend to make less than the normal minimum wage because of tips. And that's something I think a lot of people don't realize is that in the restaurant industry, a lot of the waiters and waitresses, they don't make even regular minimum wage because they make tips. Now, the good white progressives that are upper income and on the Upper West Side of Manhattan, they want to get rid of tips. They want to force waiters and waitresses to make the standard minimum wage, and get rid of tips. The waiters and waitresses hate it because many of them, if they're good, they make way more under the current system. If you're a competent waiter or waitress, you have an incentive to be good at a good restaurant because you get an incredible tip. And so though you technically on paper make less than minimum wage, you wind up taking home more. And the good white progressives up the Upper West Side in Manhattan don't seem to realize this. They actually want to cut your pay by getting rid of your tips. You know what they say is, well, we're going to up the minimum wage to $20 an hour, so they'll work out well. Except look at the people in California. More than 10,000 hospitality workers in California in the fast food industry have lost their job in just the last 2 weeks. More than 10,000. Have you heard that in the news? It's a true story. More than 10,000 people in the last 2 weeks in California have lost their job because of the minimum wage hike in fast food restaurants to $20 an hour. They put a lot of people out of work. And here comes Donald Trump telling the service industry in Nevada, Republicans will exempt tips from income taxes. Think of the single moms. Well, yeah, I mean, so I have a buddy of mine. He says one day he's going to go like do his single mother charity in Las Vegas, which is code for I'm going to go to the strip club and give the single moms tips. He hasn't actually taken it up on him. His wife would murder him if he did. But nonetheless, think of the single moms in Las Vegas hustling for tips at their jobs, and suddenly that's going to be tax-free. Suburban women are going to win or lose this election for Donald Trump. Donald Trump is telling the single moms of Las Vegas bars and strip clubs and casinos and restaurants and hotels, I'm not going to tax your tips. Where do you think they're going to vote? They're going to vote with their pocketbook. It's a really big deal. And one the Democrats can't really account for, what the Democrats are doing is screaming, what about the debt? What about the debt? What about the debt? Joe Biden wants to give the single moms of Las Vegas a credit when they buy their electric vehicle. Donald Trump wants them to be able to keep their tips tax-free. What do you think's going to matter? What's real notable here is how quiet the Democrats have been on this policy initiative from Trump. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number is 877-973-7425. If you want to be on the program, Dwayne, let's go to you next. Welcome to the show. If there I go. How are you, Dwayne?
Thanks for having me on. No, I thought it was right on point when you were saying worried about the deficit. No, the point that I think is good would be to say this is the loss in revenue. Compare that to how much Joe Biden is giving away on the student loan bailouts. That's $165 billion so far. And so I'd say I'd rather, Trump give that back to the people that work really hard for it every single day and let them keep more of that money and probably provide a much greater boost to the economy. That's my thought.
Look, I think that's a great thought, Dwayne. Thanks for the phone call. The fact that these working class people bailed out the people with the student loans, and now Donald Trump wants to let these working class people, have their money back. Good. Let them. I don't have a problem with it. Y'all, environmentalism, I say it often, it's a cult. In New York City, there was a congestion charge they were going to impose. The governor at the very last minute got rid of it. There's a new study that turns out that the air pollution on Manhattan Island is actually not terrible. It would improve, but the Bronx would actually get the worst of it. The air quality in the Bronx would, because of the way this congestion charge worked, be even worse. And the Bronx already has the worst air pollution in New York City, but it's where the poor people live, as opposed to Manhattan, where the rich people live. Well, now there's this. This is really bizarre. More than 4,000 Joshua trees are going to be cut down starting tomorrow for a solar farm. 4,000 Joshua trees, many over 8 feet tall, at least 80 years old. They're going to be cut down to put solar panels in. Now, I'm just looking on and I realize it's Wikipedia. Let me just read you this. Joshua trees are one of the species predicted to have their range reduced and shifted by climate change. Concerns remain that they will be eliminated from Joshua Tree National Park, with ecological research suggesting a high probability populations will be reduced 90% of their current range by the end of the 21st century. In March 2022, California Department of Fish and Wildlife conducted a status review of the western Joshua tree to determine whether or not to list the species as threatened. The study showed that the largest threat was wildfire. The wildfires were a threat to population density. The study showed reducing populations are threatening the Joshua tree, and now they're going to cut them down in California to put solar panels in. Unreal. At the border, we've got problems, too, and Americans for Prosperity, their foundation has been sending conservatives to the border to see it for yourselves. In broad daylight, you can watch the mass of humanity cross the Rio Grande into the country. And a lot of people don't realize it's just that open, and yet it is. It's an ecological toll on the area. It's a human cost. It's a social services cost. And so Americans for Prosperity Foundation has been taking people down there, and then Americans for Prosperity has been reminding people that there are common sense, easy solutions to deploy to solve the issue. They've set up a website, secureborder.secureamerica.com, for you to see those solutions. Secureborder.secureamerica.com, brought to you by Americans for Prosperity, has the common sense solutions that we can deploy, from a border wall to more staff for the Border Patrol to technology for tracking and keeping track of people coming across the border. It's all there. It's all available at secureborder.secureamerica.com, brought to you by Americans for Prosperity. Go check out secureborder.secureamerica.com today. Welcome back. It's Eric Erickson. The phone number is 877-973-7425. Should you wish to be on the program, going to go to John's call here. Welcome to the show, sir. How are you?
Doing well, Mr. Eric. How are you, man?
Great.
Eric, I want to dig in a little deeper on this tipped, whether it should be taxed or not. And I guess I want to find out how you really feel about it. I owned a restaurant for well over 30 years, and I could point to a handful of times where what was my best interest may not always have been the most fair thing, and certainly this tip situation is one of them. You have servers who makes a lot more money than kitchen staff do, and I was required to pay them somewhere around $2 an hour, a little bit more than that. And they had to claim in their tips at least minimum wage, which was $7 something an hour, and I believe that it still is. And if they didn't claim at least that much, they had to sign a piece of paper that said, I realize I'm claiming less than that. And my advice to them was always, do you know what would happen if the Internal Revenue audited your credit card statements? You would be making many, many times more than minimum wage. So I guess my point is, why is it fair for people to not pay taxes on their tips when the dishwasher and the cook standing right beside them makes a fraction of their money and pays far more in taxes than they do? I guess I want to know how you feel about it.
Yeah, it's not fair at all, and it's probably terrible public policy, to be quite honest with you. But it's also, as far as politics go, it's a great political issue for Trump. We got to separate the politics from the policy here. If Joe Biden's going to bail out college-educated people's student loans on the backs of the working class, Donald Trump telling them, I'm not going to tax your tips, that the Democrats want to eliminate, which would actually drive your income down. It's good politics for Trump, particularly in a place like Nevada. As for the actual tax code, though, no, it's completely unworkable, and I don't see how they could even do it. In large part because, in some restaurants, you've got the employees get to take their tips together. In other restaurants, it's the tips are pooled, and then whose tips is everybody going to start tipping? Is your lawyer going to want to start being tipped so that he bypasses taxes? Yeah, it opens a massive can of worms that I think is impractical. The politics of it's great. The policy of it's a non-starter. Because, it actually would cause fiscal calamity as everyone suddenly, when I renegotiate my radio contract, I'm going to renegotiate and want to be paid in tips.
That's fair. I absolutely get that.
But for the stripper economy, it would be amazing in Las Vegas, and they'd vote for Trump.
Well, think about the tips that they receive. But I appreciate you saying so. And,
man. Yeah, John, I got to let you go because the tip jokes are going to get me in all sorts of trouble if I go down that road. But, literally, y'all, this is really good politics for Donald Trump to say this. Again, let me just play you this audio again. This is from CBS News. It's anecdote. It's not data, but it was noticed.
I did talk with some hotel workers yesterday, some service workers here in Las Vegas, about how that is playing with them. And Anne-Marie, about 6 people told me that would change their vote. That is enough to make them switch from voting Democrat to Republican if Donald Trump is promising something like that to them.
It's true. Now, to John's point here, what you guys may not realize is, so in restaurants, the wait staff makes less than minimum wage, but they get tips. The cooks and the dishwashers in the back of the house, they don't get tips. They get paid minimum wage. And what ultimately happens is the waiters and waitresses wind up making more money than the cooks and the dishwashers because of the amount of tips that they get. And it would actually be a big deal to our economic situation and tax revenue into the federal government. I'm never opposed to people keeping more of their own money. But when you put people like that in a restaurant situation where the back of the house has to pay taxes and the front of the house doesn't, you're engaging in a weird level of class warfare that I think becomes economically and politically destabilizing. But for Trump in Nevada to say this and to say he wants to push this forward is actually a huge positive for him and a smart way to campaign. But it's one of those promises he can't keep because financially it would be too difficult to make it work. And I can't see the Republicans on the Ways and Means Committee going along with something like that. But that's on them, not on him. And then there's this other economic issue. This is Harry Hinton on CNN.
Bankrate found that on average, Americans are spending $18,000 a year to own and maintain their home. That is obviously a lot of money. When you think about it, it's almost like the cost of buying a used car a year. This is 26% more than in 2020. And of course, this is all on top of your mortgage payment, right? Yeah. We're talking about the cost of energy, the cost of property taxes. And the biggest drivers, according to Bankrate, are the fact that it's gotten more expensive to maintain a home and also the cost of home insurance. Now, we've seen premiums spike, right, for 2 reasons. One, it's the fact that there's the climate crisis has made it more likely that there's these disasters, right? We've seen wildfires and hurricanes and flooding. Then the cost of living, labor, materials, that's all gone up. So it's more expensive to repair when this happens. I spoke to a woman in California yesterday who told me that her home insurance rate doubled with no notice because of concerns about wildfires. On top of that, they have to spend $10,000 to repair the plumbing. Now she's taking on extra hours to try to make ends meet, and she's not alone, Kate.
Look, this is the economic reality right now for people in the United States under Joe Biden's economy. And yeah, the Democrats can say Donald Trump's a convicted felon, and given Joe Biden's unpopularity, Donald Trump should be running away with this, but he is a convicted felon, and so the race is very close, and Joe Biden can win. And here's the reality. I do want to be very clear with you right now. And let me just tell you exactly where I stand in the race at the moment, how I view the race right now. It's too early. It's too early to know. When we get to Labor Day, both sides will have had their conventions. We will have had a presidential debate. We'll see. However, if the election were held tomorrow, Donald Trump has some distinct advantages because of the economy. However, if you put a gun to my head and you said you don't have to go with who you're voting for, but you got to tell me who you think is going to win. If you put a gun to my head tomorrow and said you got to tell me who you think is going to win and be honest and candid whether people like it or not, I'd say Joe Biden has a particular advantage, and he would probably win. And the reason is the upper Midwest, because you have Democratic governors now in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, and Democratic governors have ground game operations like you saw Brian Kemp in Georgia, Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. Democratic governors have ground game operations that really help candidates for office in other areas. And you have Gretchen Whitmer now in Michigan, Governor Shapiro in Pennsylvania, Evers in Wisconsin. They have ground game operations. And if Joe Biden wins those three states, he has 270 electoral college votes, the bare minimum, but that's his path to victory. The dubiousness is on Pennsylvania. Donald Trump has a great relationship with the working class there. This John Fetterman shift, even though he's a Biden supporter, this interesting shift for John Fetterman is a bit of a warning sign for Democrats. Something's in the air there. Progressives are not liked, but incumbency has its advantages. There's something else. The ground game. The Democrats objectively right now have a better ground game. The Republicans are building one. The Republicans are building a good ground game. But right now the Democrats have the better ground game. And every vote matters. You still have a lot of Republicans who want to vote on election day. They don't want to do early voting. They don't want to do absentee voting. Those things do matter. And so I would give a slight advantage to Joe Biden. It's a slight advantage, but I'd give an advantage to Joe Biden right now, ultimately, if you put a gun to my head and made me tell you what I think. However, give it a couple of months. Go through the debates. You got the first debate at the end of this month. Then have the conventions in July and August. And then led the Republican fundraising. Donald Trump is now outraising Joe Biden on the campaign trail. Because he's outraising Joe Biden among small dollar donors, you know what? That means that those small dollar donors, they're all voters. And it's significant that he's winning with those people. So the momentum right now, I think, is for Trump even after the conviction. So give it a few more months, let the Republican ground game get out the door, let the fundraising amp up, and we haven't really even seen the attack ads yet. The attack ads on Joe Biden and the economy, the GOP could be brutal on him. I personally, if I had the money to do it, or I knew a billionaire Republican donor who would let me do it with his money, I would begin an ad campaign right now. I wouldn't wait. And the ad campaign I would do right now would just be targeting the swing counties in the swing states on the excesses of progressivism. 3 teens are being charged with leaving tire marks on a painted on the road gay pride flag. But the Hamas protesters in Washington, D.C., no one's going to be charged with vandalizing public property. But a grandmother who prayed at an abortion clinic is going to prison for 2 years, despite being 75 years old and in a wheelchair. She'll go to prison for 2 years. The excesses of the left, you could do an entire ad campaign. These are the people standing with Joe Biden. These are the people Joe Biden will advance. These are the policies Joe Biden supports. You could do that now and define Joe Biden not as the empathetic moderate who cares, but as the man in the pocket of the radical left. I think this is a campaign that the Republican mega donors should be pursuing and doing it right now and defining Joe Biden by the radical left. So much so that when Joe Biden does decide he's got to pivot, because that's what the polling shows him, that he can't do it. I think this matters. I think reminding people of the radicalism of the left matters. And I think it's a way for Donald Trump to also pursue younger black men. You know, James Clyburn was on TV. He was asked about young black men voting for Trump. This is what he had to say.
And I'm going to tell you something. There's zero support in that place last night for Donald Trump. Zero support throughout the African Methodist Episcopal Church, where I'm going in a few minutes, for Donald Trump. Yet there are some people, if he got 8 to 12% before, there's some people who vote blindly by party. There are people who are members of the party of Lincoln, and they are going to be members of the party of Lincoln. My mother and father were members of the party of Lincoln, but they are not, they would not be today if they were still alive, Trump is. So these polls, I have no idea what's going on with it, but I saw what happened in Maryland when they said that the young lady who was running in the primary against a multi-millionaire said she was 7 points down 2 days before the election. The day after the election, she was 13 points up. That's a 20-point swing. How can the poll get that so wrong?
When you are out there saying the polling is all wrong, that tends to mean you're losing, because there are lots of wrong polls out there, but the trends, if they're all detecting it, tend to be right. And the trend line for everything is that Donald Trump is making inroads with particularly young black men. Kamala Harris would not be going to Atlanta on Friday to woo black men if the polling that the Democrats have internally, the deep dive polls that are expensive, hard to produce, and well done and not released publicly, if that polling didn't show Joe Biden's got a problem with black men, Kamala Harris wouldn't be going to Atlanta tying up traffic on a Friday afternoon. But she is, because they're having problems. And why? Because Joe Biden authored the 3 strikes you're outlaw, and Donald Trump authored the First Step Act and allowed a lot of young black men out of prison who went in under Joe Biden's law. That matters. There's an account I follow, a Georgia account that covered on Instagram, Kamala Harris coming to Atlanta on Friday. I can't read you the comments on air, but the comments from the young black men in this thread on Instagram are pretty vile about Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. There's clearly something happening, whether Jim Clyburn wants to admit it or not. When all the polls are showing you everything is headed in that direction, the polling number may be wrong, but the trend is probably right. And the fact that Joe Biden is having to respond suggests he's seeing it in his data too. And Donald Trump doesn't need 30%. He only needs 15%. And that matters, and that makes a difference. And if he keeps it up, he can win with young black men and Hispanic voters as well. Now, I got to tell you about Old Glory Bank before I get out of here. It is a great online bank. I had a great experience with them yesterday using my Old Glory debit card. I thought I had misplaced it. I wasn't sure if I had lost it in the airport, and I wasn't sure, and so I was able to use the Old Glory app, and I froze it. So if I did lose it at the airport, nobody could use it. But then it turns out I had, when I was going through security, had issues, and it fell out of my wallet in my backpack. And you know what? I was able to reactivate it. I found it. I got to Louisiana last night, cleaned up my bag, found my debit card, turned it back on. I didn't have to cancel it, didn't have to report it lost. I just froze it until I knew for sure. And it's that level of innovation why I love Old Glory Bank. You can do loans with Old Glory Bank. You can get no-fee checking, no-fee savings accounts. You can deposit cash. Even though they have no physical location in your area, you can still deposit cash at 85,000 retail locations around the country. They're just a highly innovative bank built by conservatives for conservatives. And last night saved me when I thought I lost my debit card. So what you do is you go to oldglorybank.com. You can get an account in less than 8 minutes. Oldglorybank.com. Oldglorybank.com. It is my bank. I really do have an account with them. You can too. Oldglorybank.com. Member FDIC. Equal housing lender. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the nation, coming to you from rural Louisiana this week. The phone number, 877-973-7425. I know you guys sometimes get real frustrated, particularly with Senate Republicans who seem not to fight, but they're fighting now. Jim Risch of Idaho. He's the committee's top Republican. He's refusing to give his consent for the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to take up legislation or nominations until the Democrats are willing to bring up the International Criminal Court bill that would impose sanctions on the ICC members over their anti-Semitism. Republicans say Democrats aren't engaging in a serious way on the bipartisan piece of legislation or are trying to give political cover to the White House, which opposes sanctioning the court even as they condemn it. Republicans are pointing to the House's passage of the ICC sanctions bill that dozens of Democrats supported it, and that's why it should be brought up. Now, Jim Risch's ultimatum is significant because the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has actually acted on a pretty bipartisan basis the whole way through. He's now being attacked for political maneuverings by the Democrats, but he's saying we're going to refuse consent to bring up consideration of certain matters unless the Democrats are willing to do this. Chuck Schumer has said he supported the legislation, but Joe Biden has asked him to slow roll it and not advance it, and thus far he's complied with the White House orders. That's not going over well with a lot of Democrats and Republicans in Congress who are ready to shut down the ICC. You got George Clooney, who's been lobbying on behalf of the ICC for his wife, Amal Clooney, who actually helped structure what the ICC is doing, been condemned by Republicans and Democrats alike, including Joe Biden, but Joe Biden doesn't actually want to take action because he's not actually serious about shutting down the anti-Semitism from the ICC. He finds it useful as a way to give him leverage with Israel. Politics. Joe Biden can't afford to anger the left in this country right now, and the left is increasingly anti-Semitic. It's a shame that Israel and its national security situation and the situation of Jews in the United States against this visceral anti-Semitism that's festered in the left is all held hostage by Joe Biden's need to run for re-election. It's a shame, but this is the world we live in. If it was the Republicans, the media would be all over it. Because it's the Democrats, they won't say anything.